It's actually more of a comment, and just I wanted to think along this line of thought. Like going back to Foucault, not in the negative sense, but going back, I think you can actually defeat any kind of using your same lines of reasoning. You can defeat any lines of conjecture that would be put forward from like Foucault's point of view by changing your idea as a form of therapy into a creation of angst and a necessity of angst that is created in Foucault's own sense, like historically, and into the future as well, that humans necessitate in that sense. And it seems like going along with the lines of structure, what we have here is a fundamental difference between two opposing forces that humans almost create for themselves. In Victorian times, that's where it arises. We have the person as internally conflicted between their superego, like as a censorship on the subconscious, and the subconscious trying to get out. And like you said, structurally that is directly mirrored in the division between the proletariat and the bourgeois. The bourgeois is that censorship and that oppression. Now, as you can see, it almost seems that you've come in to interject into the middle of history and has taken this chunk out where you could add on and take a more stronger sense and saying that no way, this is a theme that is consistent, and why not take that stronger step and say, well, no, this is the way that humanity has to be, and our existence evolutionarily necessitates that we create this angst in our own lives because it's the way that we're designed. And it makes sense going farther back into the past as well, saying that we always had to have that struggle between our existence and nature. But when that dichotomy broke down as we developed ways to focus on our own lives, we started creating them for ourselves in feudalism, in Platonic politics, and then moving from there, then we have the bourgeois, and then more internally, and even in the future now, we have the existential problems. And that seems to be just an extrapolation of the exact same issue. And can you see how the structuralism and the structural components that are similar between Marx and Freud could be extrapolated to include anyone, to Nietzsche's slave and master morality, to Foucault's like the historical and the archaeological aspect as well. Does that make sense?
No, you said a lot, and yeah, I mean, I'm not exactly sure whether I understand what you mean with angst, although it's using the German word. I see that. I see that there's a very strong. Sorry, I'll be very short, and then you can help me to understand any of that. I see that both Freud and Marx are making very strong anthropological assumptions. They could actually play that card more strongly. That, as you said, we've always been in a certain respect historically, materially defined. Yeah, I see that, and that the denial of that comes back as a form of the uncanny, as a form of angst, as you say. I see that too, and I think I like this idea very much. Yes, but at the same time, I'm not exactly sure whether this helps me to combine these two thinkers, or to see the structural analogy between these two thinkers, as I wanted to point it out, in similarity or in conjunction with Nietzsche and Foucault. Actually, I doubt that this would help me, because exactly here I would have the difference between latent and manifest. But okay, yeah, probably this would help me to get rid of the problem of having the strong position of party and analyst, which, as Samir implicitly accused me to have. And yeah, well, it's me, I'm sorry.
If I could say one thing quickly before we move on, there is a historical precedent, and you don't want to go back to that precedent of an attempted synthesis of Marx and Freud, not in the strong evolutionary terms that I know you're articulating this, but in a really way that's got some structural features in common with at least Darwin's understanding of the evolution of species, and really the confrontation with nature. And this is, of course, dialectic enlightenment. Right? The idea of the dialectic enlightenment is the notion that enlightenment embodies mythological fear turned radical, right? Sort of a hyper exacerbation of the primordial fear that the individual encounters in relation to a potentially overwhelming nature. And so I think that there's that to maybe read dialectic enlightenment. What do you think about that?
I was just going to maybe comment on the question, or hopefully clarify from my own point of view, that I would say, other than angst, which is about, I would say tension between, as Louis sort of more of an accurate concept that you're driving at, and it's obviously the subconscious and the unconscious and the individual versus organizational as being structurally similar.
I hope that I understand your point correctly, but I now realize that I haven't really made a decision about whether I agree with, and I insinuate to agree, whether I really agree with Laclau and the idea that something like the real, something like the material ground, which we never admit to exist, is really a product of symbolical practices, or whether there is something materially vital, materially present underneath symbolic representation. In fact, I tend to agree with the second interpretation and a bit less with the Laclauian symbolicist interpretation of that. So in fact, I think I should distance myself more strongly from Laclau and all these symbolicists, culturalists.
Further questions or comments?
What were other structural similarities, like just going back even to Marcuse, things like surplus repression, and the relationship between ego and, if you like, relations of production, the superstructure and superego and that sort of thing. I mean, those sorts of broad structural similarities were drawn then, and he also used Schiller, of course.
Yeah.
Do you see any more value in that tradition?
Yeah,
Way
it's
it
a bit of a
structural
generational thing that I...
Yeah.
You're completely right that the most influential way of interpreting Schiller in a Marxist and psychoanalytical line of tradition is the interpretation of Marcuse. So why am I... what kind of structural, I said it's a generational thing, what kind of structural elements are working inside my brain that make me deny this tradition? I wish I had a good argument now. I mean, Freudo-Marxism, Wilhelm Reich, Herbert Marcuse, has a line of tradition in which the difference in subject was tendentially or by trend denied, was something that I tried to leave out of my paper, because I didn't want to argue that it was actually about the same thing. I didn't want to argue that you have to add them up to each other. I didn't want to argue that, but then again, I claim that there is a structural similarity and equiprimordiality between subject and body politic. And we have to think on that a bit more. But I hope that it's about these primary intuitions that I haven't really included in Marcuse.